Hi, it's Roger here, and I've got Stephen Kotler with me, who has a new book coming out, which is called The Rise of Superman, and it's all part and parcel of his study of flow, the Flow Genome Project, and the work he's been doing ever since I got to know him after he just come out with Abundance, which is about really the endpoint of flow when you really think about it. So, hey, Stephen, great to have you here.
Roger, super great to talk to you.
Yes, tell us a little bit about what was the driving motivator that got you to actually write The Rise of Superman in the first place?
The driving motivator and actually kind of the central idea are essentially the same thing, so I can sort of answer both at once. But I have been around action and adventure sports really my whole professional life. I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my career chasing, extreme athletes around mountains, broke about 100 bones along the way, that kind of thing. But what I kept noticing is that, every time I'd be with these people, I would see something that literally looked like somebody was defying the laws of gravity. I got to see the impossible done over and over again. And what I started to do is I tried to quantify it, and I started really looking at the numbers. And what happens is if you look at action and adventure sports, surfing, skiing, downhill mountain biking, rock climbing, etc., as a data set, right? You throw everything else out, just look at the numbers. What you see over the past generation, the past 25 years, essentially, is nearly exponential growth in ultimate human performance. Now that is staggering. Sports performance is slow, it's steady, it's governed by the laws of evolution. You plot it on a graph, you get a linear curve. You do not get a nearly exponential curve. At no point in sports history do you see performance quintuple in a decade, but that's exactly what's happening in action and adventure sports. And let me just give you a quick example. So you understand what I'm looking at.
Sure.
Surfing is a 1,000-year-old sport. From 400 AD to 1996, biggest wave anybody's ever surfed is 25 feet. Above that, we thought it was impossible. It was beyond the laws of physics. You couldn't do it. Today, they're surfing waves over 100 feet. In the early 90s, the biggest jump anybody had ever cleared on a snowboard was 40 feet. It was the Baker Road Gap. And a couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with Travis Rice, who's a pro snowboarder, and one of the guys who's been in our videos and has been wonderful to work with. And he's telling me he recently had cleared 230 feet. That just doesn't happen anywhere else. So the question, what I was looking at and where this book came from, half of it was the question of what the hell is going on here?
Right.
What is this? How is this possible? And it was more specifically as I was looking at ultimate human performance, not even just human performance. Ultimate human performance is performance when life or limb is on the line. So out of all the categories, it should be the one that's the slowest to develop. And here it's, crazy. And the answer is these athletes, for reasons that we can get to, have become better at hacking the state of flow than just about anybody else in the history of the world, which is amazing because by using what they're learning, they've produced near exponential growth in really extreme performance. But what's even cooler is because science has progressed so much in the past 20 years, we can now look under the hood, figure out what these athletes are doing to hack flow. We can apply this knowledge across all domains of society.
Right.
So that's the central idea at the heart of Rise. That's why I wrote the book. From kind of both angles, right? I wanted to advance flow research on the one end, and I wanted to tell this amazing story about what's been going on in action sports when you do learn how to harness flow regularly.
So I really like that. I really like that approach you're taking. That with the whole action, like people base jumping, people doing extreme sports. It's really easy for others to dismiss that as kind of like just the fringe of people out, basically kind of risking their lives. And you've really turned it around and actually got to the core of it, which is that it's the opposite. It's not cheapening life. It's actually making life itself so much more powerful through understanding the flow state, and then applying that as to whether you're in business or whether you're just looking to try and make your life better. Can you explain in how you would define this flow state that you're zoomed into? And for the ordinary reader, or the ordinary listener, how they might be able to apply what you're learning.
So, technically, flow is defined. I'm going to cough now, as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. What that feels like, right, is in flow, it's those moments when concentration gets so intense, so focused that everything else falls away. Your sense of self vanishes. Time distorts. Sometimes it slows down, like that freeze frame of a car crash. Sometimes it speeds up and 5 hours pass by in like 5 minutes. And throughout, of course, performance, all aspects, mental and physical, go through the roof. We call it flow because that's the sensation conferred, right? In flow, every decision, every action leads effortlessly, fluidly, seamlessly to the next.
Right.
So flow feels flowy, which is where the term actually comes from. So that's the kind of shorthand definition. The application, and I won't go too much into it because it takes about 90 pages in Rise of Superman to break this down. But what we've learned, and this is, when I say what we've learned, flow research dates back to the 1870s. So there's 150 years worth of flow research. By the 1970s, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who was then running the University of Chicago psychology department, had discovered that flow states have 3 psychological triggers. And we learned this was learned in the 60s and 70s and kind of validated completely in the 80s and the 90s. During the 80s and 90s, also a guy named Keith Sawyer, who's at the University of Washington in St. Louis. He's a neuropsychologist. He was working on social triggers. So there is a shared flow experience, what was called group flow, when a bunch of people get into a flow state together. This is very common in startups, for example.
Yeah.
You see a lot of group flow there. So Keith Sawyer discovered there are 10 social triggers to flow. And then in the work that we've done at the Flow Genome Project, working with these kind of extreme case studies of extreme performers, artists and athletes alike, we've found there are 3 environmental triggers and 1 creative trigger. So, the shorthand version of what these athletes have done to create so much flow in their lives is they packed their lives with flow triggers. They built their entire lives. And they mostly did this inadvertently, right? High performers will move in these directions kind of naturally anyways, even without a lot of knowledge. But, and which is what we saw, at least in these communities. But, how it translates is anybody can start applying these triggers in their daily lives, right? We can start filling our lives with some of these triggers, and I can speak more to them if you want to go in that direction next.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know when we first met, which was over a year ago, and you were, at that point, you were sharing, I think, some of the first thoughts around the book, which has come a long way. I'm going to give all the links to the site and to the videos and everything like that. But it's just awesome seeing how you brought it all together and the support you've got from the community. And I was talking to you about wealth dynamics and the way that we were using the concepts of flow within entrepreneurship. And then more recently, when we were just talking about our iLab at our resort in Bali, and you were sharing with that the whole idea of how when you actually put flow in the middle of everything that you're doing as a core value that you're focusing at, it really is about how you're redesigning all aspects of your life. Can you talk a bit to that as to why that's so important to take that kind of an approach?
It's so important to take that kind of approach for 2 reasons. The first is, from a neurobiological standpoint, flow is complicated. A lot of things go on. One of the things that goes on is there's a very robust cascade of 5 exceptionally potent reward chemicals: dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, anandamide, endorphins. All of these amplify performance in various ways, but they're also pleasure chemicals. So flow is one of the most addictive states on earth, right? It is incredibly motivating. Once you start getting flow, you want more of it. There's an upside to it. The upside is that scientists talk about flow as the source code of intrinsic motivation. The downside is if you can't get into flow, it is very painful. There is a dark side to flow. This isn't all kind of wine and roses. We always say this isn't really self-help. It's way too dangerous to be self-help because you're playing with such powerful, fundamental kind of neurobiology. The reason I told you all that is you want to kind of maximize the flow in your life. And flow, it's a 4-stage process. The first stage is called struggle. It's very unflowy. And you can get stuck there for a very, very long time, kind of trying to learn new skills and absorb new information. And the reason you want to build your life around flow is you want as many different flow channels as possible. So you look at a lot of these athletes, by the way, they're extreme athletes during the day. They play music at night. Why? Because there's creative triggers for flow, and that's a really good second way in. They've got vibrant social lives. There's a lot of kind of social triggers. They've really built everything around it. I always, in my own life, right, I do three things. I work as a writer, and thus creativity is a gateway into flow. I throw myself down mountains at high speeds on bikes and skis and whatever, right? So we know risk, high consequences is another one of these triggers for flow. But I also run an animal sanctuary with my wife. Why? Because there's an altruism-based flow state called helper's high. And so altruism is another gateway into flow. The reason all this is so important is if I get stuck in one, some of the others might be moving forward. And the more flow you get, the more flow you get. You're teaching the brain how to drop into flow quickly, right? And if I have a good day out skiing, it's going to carry over and I'm going to slide into flow the next morning while writing much more easily. So one of the reasons you have to kind of throw everything out and start over is once you start playing with flow, you want more and more of it. And that means you got to put this stuff at the center of your life. It really kind of has to become your most important value. But you also want to make sure that you're not kind of, these neurochemicals that you're playing with are powerful. And when your brain starts craving them and can't get more of them, it can be unpleasant. Csikszentmihalyi said that unlike other addictions, flow leads forward. It's an addiction to the future, and it doesn't take you backwards like other addictions, but it doesn't mean it's any more pleasant when you can't get into the state. So I find that when you redesign your entire life around the state, you redesign everything you do to maximize flow, you're kind of protecting against the dark side, and you're giving yourself the greatest chance to learn these skills everywhere.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the biggest challenges that I find when we're working with entrepreneurs or even individuals who have just created so much complexity in their life or have so many challenges they're facing themselves with that they basically flow is like some kind of like distant land out there. And what often happens, especially when it comes to doing something with a group or doing something with their business that allows them to get into flow, they'll be saying, well, no, I've got to get more information first. I've got to get clear about this first. And one of the things that I share with them is, look, a lot of people think that the way to get to something like flow is first you need clarity, but you just watch a muddy pond and you think if you want to get clarity in that pond, what do you do? And what you do is you put water through it and you actually create flow. So rather than needing clarity to get the flow, it's actually flow that creates that clarity. And one of the things you just said, which was flow as the source code for intrinsic motivation, that once you start moving into flow, whichever way you do it, it actually leads to this momentum within your life. And then you mentioned 3 different triggers that you use. Are there other triggers you can share, or you're telling me earlier about the diagnostic side?
So of course. And by the way, when I was talking about altruism and creativity, I'm sort of conflating on-ramps and triggers. But let's talk about where top executives go wrong. One place, because it's pretty funny. One of the psychological flow triggers is what's known as the challenge skills balance. The idea here is that flow exists sort of on the midpoint between boredom and anxiety. So the task you're working on has to be interesting and difficult enough so you're nowhere near boredom. You move well past that, but not hard enough that you fall into anxiety and get gripped and you can't slide into flow.
Right.
So, we've known this for a while. We are starting to drill down deeper into what is that actual variant. We know the challenge has to be slightly harder than the skills we bring to the table. So what is that number? Csikszentmihalyi and a Google mathematician teamed up and got 4% as a number, sort of back of the envelope calculation. We've been looking at that number pretty seriously at the Flow Genome Project for the past couple of years, and we're finding something very similar. So it probably is in that sweet spot. And what's interesting about that particular sweet spot is 4% for a high-performing top executive, they will blow by 4% without even noticing, right? Because they're so used to charging hard ahead that they push way too hard to get into flow. For underperformers, for people who don't want to work that hard, 4% is difficult to access because you're already feeling uncomfortable, right? 4% is past the, oh, I totally know what I'm doing, I got this, into, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable with this, but I'm still kind of moving along. There's risk there, one way or the other. And it seems so people have a very hard time kind of staying in that sweet spot, myself included, especially at work. You know what I mean? be pushing way past 4%, trying to get some writing done, and it's not working. It's not working. What I really need to do is go ride my bike for a while, but I get stuck there and I grit my teeth and I think, God damn it, this time it'll be different, even though I don't know better.
Got it. Got it.
You know, so
Yeah.
that's another one of those psychological triggers. But I mean, the shorthand for everybody to know: flow follows focus. So anything that grabs and holds your attention, chances are it's going to drive you into flow.
Right. Right. And then in terms of those kind of different triggers, you talked about the social ones, you talked about the altruism, you talked about the creativity. Any other couple, if there is any there that doesn't resonate?
Sure. And we can let's talk about, we talked about risk a little bit earlier. Let's talk about the 3 environmental triggers, because this is really how action adventure sport athletes maximize flow. It's these 3 triggers. They're very powerful. One of them is high consequences, right? Risk focuses attention. But the thing to remember here is it doesn't have to be physical risk. It can be emotional risk, social risk, psychological risk, intellectual risk. It doesn't matter, and it's different for everybody. Big wave surfers, they got to paddle into a 100-foot wave to pull that trigger. The shy guy, he's just got to walk across the room to say hello to the pretty gal to pull that trigger, right? Totally contextual. Differs for everybody. But high consequence is very, 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 very important. And one of the reasons creativity works is creativity, when you look under the hood of creativity, it's a different flow trigger, but it's really a combination of intellectual risk, social risk, creative risk, and pattern recognition. Besides the point, but risk and high consequences and creativity are actually kind of linked. The next thing that action and adventure sports provide is what we call deep embodiment. Deep embodiment literally just means you're paying attention to all your senses all at once. And it doesn't just mean, sight, smell, touch, all that stuff. It means your sense of balance, your awarenesses of your body in space, proprioception, vestibular awareness. All these data streams are fired up at once. Now, one of the reasons that action adventure sports triggers this so frequently is because sports are packed with G-forces, multiple G's, 0 G's, and polyaxial rotation, which is rotation around your middle. As gravity-bound creatures, we don't experience this often. So when suddenly we're feeling them all at once and our senses all fire up, everybody, focuses attention into the now and it drives flow. Deep embodiment really is just another way of saying learning by doing, right? When Csikszentmihalyi Kevin Rothunde, who's at the University of Utah, went looking for really high flow environments, one of the things they stumbled upon was Montessori education. Why? Because Montessori is built around 90-minute periods of uninterrupted concentration, and B, it's often called embodied education. It's learning through doing, it's building, it's using your hands, it's using all your senses. Your sense of touch and your sense of sight are very, very tightly coupled. So when both of them are engaged at once, much greater chance of learning taking place, things moving short-term holding into long-term storage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, right, deep embodiment is the second one. The third one is a rich environment. And a rich environment is a fancy way of saying lots of novelty, lots of complexity, lots of unpredictability. Why, for example, do startups trigger flow so much? Lots of risk, lots of novelty, lots of unpredictability, lots of complexity, right? They're very high flow environments because they pull both those triggers at once. Same thing kind of with action sports. The natural world is just filled with novelty, complexity, and unpredictability. So it acts as a very deep flow trigger. But obviously, we can seek those things out in our daily lives. And, you see the novelty over and over again in everything from like Pixar's design, Steve Jobs' design of Pixar, where it was built so people will bump into each other, create what Tony Hsieh calls serendipity. He's, built all of downtown Vegas to produce kind of these novel encounters because it drives innovation so much. Right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, it's almost counterintuitive to the old way of doing things, which is kind of like knuckle down and get to your desk. And if anything, it's actually being at your desk trying to get your work done is often the most counterproductive thing you can do. It's like Richard Branson, who was when asked, what's the one thing you would accredit the most for your success in business? He says it's when every time I kind of like leave the business and go to the gym, it's actually just shift. And you said very much the same as going for a bike ride. So a lot of the things, and pretty much everything, that I do, whether it's the assessment test, the Genius test, or whether it's the fast forward events that we have around the world where we're taking people in a different environment, or even like the resort, or my own new book that's coming out, The Millionaire Master Plan, they're all based on one thing, which is flow. And if you were to, because this is your whole life's work, this is what you're really focused at. If you were to like share, one thing that you would recommend people listening to this for them to be doing in their daily lives to shift into this same focus, what would be one thing you'd suggest to them?
It's not a suggestion. It's a bit of knowledge. We touched on it earlier, and it's the thing that we have found over and over again. The most powerful thing I can do to get you more flow in your life is to explain a common error, which is most people think flow is a binary. You're either in the state or you're not. The light switch is on or it's off. Turns out it's not a binary at all. Turns out it's actually a 4-part cycle. And if you know the entire cycle and know kind of a couple things about the cycle, you will absolutely, know exactly what to do to get more flow at any time. So we mentioned it earlier. The first stage is struggle. In struggle, you're overloading the brain with information. You're maximizing it. So this is an athlete learning a new skill. This is a writer doing all his research and trying to figure out how to structure the book. Struggle is very unpleasant. It doesn't feel like flow. It feels like the opposite of flow. And you actually want to keep pushing to the point that you feel like your head's about to explode. About to explode, not completely explode. The second stage is relaxation. You basically have to take your mind off the problem. So if you've been kind of studying all day, it's time to go for a walk. It's time to go you don't want to exhaust yourself. Model building seems to work really well for people. Crossword puzzles. Television works horribly. That won't work. You need to be a little more active than that. A light run kind of works. And by the way, there's neurochemistry and neurobiology underneath each of these stages, so huge changes are taking place in the brain. So once you kind of relax, what essentially will happen is this conscious mind kind of let the subconscious take over the problem. That's one of the things that happens in flow, right? Your conscious mind winks out, your prefrontal cortex actually shuts off, your subconscious takes over.
Right.
Right? So you're letting that happen in relaxation. The third stage is the flow state itself. Huge high, you feel like Superman is magnificent. It's great. The most important thing we found about flow states is, learn how to use them to maximize benefit. Don't, treat them like you've smoked pot for the first time. You're like, oh, look, pretty lights in the sky, which a lot of people do. They think they're having a mystical experience and they forget it's here for a purpose and use it to advance performance. Final thing you need to know is on the tail end of this, there's a learning and memory consolidation phase. Flow massively amplifies learning, which is great. In studies run by the military, 230% to 500% is what they saw. So it's a huge uptick in learning. But there's a downside to that. At the tail end of a flow state, all these neurochemicals are expensive to produce, and they take a little while to replenish. So you literally, all the feel-good neurochemicals are gone. Your brain is trying to move all this information from short-term storage into long-term holding. But you have to kind of be okay with the fact that you don't feel like Superman. In fact, you used to feel like Superman, and now you kind of feel horrible. And you got to have the emotional fortitude to just kind of ride it out without getting too caught up in the emotions. And the reason is, if you want to get back into flow, you have to move back into struggle. The cycle has to start over. So if you're all worked up about not feeling like Superman and not being in flow anymore during this recovery period, not only are you getting too stressed, you're blocking the learning, but you're also blocking your ability to move smoothly into struggle. So the greatest flow hacking tip I can give people is know that map works across the boards, and you can locate where you are in the cycle on the map and know what to do next.
Got it. That's awesome. That's great. Hey, thank you so much, Stephen. I'm going to provide the links to everybody to go and get a copy of your book, The Rise of Superman, which comes out at the beginning of March. So we're right on launch day coming up right now as well. So we'll do that and also give people links to the videos and everything like that. Congratulations on just the immense amount of work and everything you put towards actually making this happen. And as you were saying earlier, especially with the Flow Genome Project, we're really at the beginning of a journey here, right?
Yeah, I wrote the book so we could kind of get everybody on the same page with where the research was today. But what's really exciting is what happens tomorrow.
Yeah.
When everybody gets involved, right? To me, this is the biggest open source citizen science project in history, right? It's let's all hack ultimate human performance together. Awesome. That's interesting.
Very cool. Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Thank you, Roger.
Cheers.